Everyone knew Brian only became Helen's boyfriend because Jason went back to his home country, and everyone was waiting for the drama, a show where Brian gets ditched when Jason comes back. But nobody knew that Brian was waiting, too. Waiting for the day Helen would break up with him. At 5:30 p.m. at the local marriage registry, after the last couple left, an employee approached Brian, eyes filled with sympathy. "Hi there. We're about to close. The person you're waiting for hasn't arrived." Brian clutched the marriage application form and quietly said, "Give me a moment. I'll make one last call." He pulled out his phone to call Helen. The call interface already had 12 missed calls, and this last one wasn't answered either. Brian silently closed his phone, apologized, and left the registry. As the door closed behind him, he paused. In the next instant, he ripped up the marriage form and tossed it in the trash. It was the third and final time Helen had stood him up on their wedding registration day. He loved Helen, but he wasn't a pathetic fool without self-respect. "Helen, loving you ends here," he murmured. In the back of a cab, Brian checked his social feed right away. He saw a mutual friend posting something new. "So happy to see an old friend return. Welcome back, Jason." In the picture, sitting among friends was Helen he hadn't been able to reach all day. Right next to her was Jason, Brian's former best friend and her first love. The three of them grew up together, but Jason didn't even tell Brian he was back. Brian took a deep breath and liked the post. Before there was any reaction, his boss messaged him, "The H Airlines project is yours." Brian immediately perked up. He got it. He looked at the cab driver. "Could you please take me to the accounting firm instead?" The H Airlines project was worth millions. Rather than go home alone, he decided to work late. By 10 p.m., the city lights were just turning on. Brian left the firm and hailed a cab home. The place was dark, completely quiet. Brian was used to scenes like this, so after freshening up, he prepared to sleep. Unexpectedly, the doorbell rang. Brian got up and opened the door and was taken aback. Helen was there, drunk enough to lean on Jason for support. The sight stabbed Brian's heart right away. After a few seconds of silence, he managed to say, "Long time, no see." "Long time indeed," Jason replied with a smile, then casually asked, "Why didn't you come to my welcome back party tonight?" Jason looked just as handsome as ever, wearing a white dress shirt with neat short hair. In his usual tone, Brian replied, "Today was actually supposed to be our wedding registration day." The air went still. Jason's eyes flickered, and he showed a sheepish expression. "Sorry about that. I must have got caught up in things." "No worries. It wasn't important anyway." Brian glanced at Helen, thinking peacefully to himself that he wasn't planning to go through with the marriage anymore. He stepped back, offering space. "Do you want to come in?" Jason hesitated but politely declined. "No, I've just gotten back and have a lot to do. Helen's in your care. If she gets a headache after drinking, remember to make her some hangover tea in the morning with extra honey." He paused, gave a meaningful smile, and said, "Oh, I almost forgot. You're her boyfriend now. You probably know all this." Jason's words pierced Brian. Of course, he knew. Little details about Helen had been seared into his memory during a decade-long crush. Brian didn't lose his composure, but instead smiled. It's funny how the guy who left Helen behind for a research offer abroad still remembers her likes and dislikes. Jason froze. Brian shut the door and guided Helen to the bedroom. After wetting a towel in the bathroom, he was about to wipe Helen's face when she opened her eyes. The next moment, Helen's warm kiss fell on him. Brian tried to pull away, but Helen was too strong. In the dimly lit bedroom, two figures were inseparably tangled. Helen's voice, muddled, called out by his ear, "Jason, stop messing around." Brian froze, his heart twisting with pain. He closed his eyes, silently enduring it. When it was over, he looked over at the sleeping Helen, then shakily got up and went to the bathroom. His stomach burned like fire, and he lay down next to Helen, finally drifting into a restless sleep. The next morning, the alarm went off, and Brian woke up. The bed was empty beside him. He got up quickly to wash up and ran into Helen on her way out. She stood straight, a calm look in her eyes. "Remember, you have a follow-up at the hospital tomorrow." Brian paused, his heart tugged again. He didn't mention he'd already booked the appointment, just replied casually, "All right." She didn't want his child a secret they both understood. Frankly, he didn't want any ties with her anymore. Helen, satisfied, turned to leave but suddenly remembered, "Oops, I had something come up yesterday, and I forgot our registration. We'll go again when we have time." This was the third time Brian had heard her say that. He had nothing left to say and just replied, "Sure, when you have time." Helen was surprisingly calm, and she just glanced at him without saying anything before leaving the room. When Brian arrived at the office, he immediately went to the admin manager. "No need to approve my wedding leave." The admin manager looked at him in shock. "What happened? Weren't you getting married? Did the wedding date change?" Brian shook his head. "No, I'm not getting married anymore." Seeing the shocked look on the admin manager's face, he handed over a stack of papers. "Also, I've applied for a long-term position in Germany. I'm leaving next month." The admin manager was even more surprised and asked multiple times, "Are you sure? You have no base in Germany. It's like starting over." Brian gave a serious smile. "The senior management positions here are saturated. To move up, I have to start over." After leaving the admin manager's office, Brian returned to his own office, opened a dossier, and got to work. It was 9 p.m. when Brian finally got home. He saw Helen focused on writing something on her tablet. Her sleeves were rolled up casually, revealing her fair arms. Seeing Brian, Helen closed the tablet and looked at him calmly. "Did you know Jason is back?" "Yeah," Brian replied steadily, looking her in the eye. "He brought you home when you were drunk last night." Helen paused. She then raised an eyebrow, slightly dodging the topic, and simply said, "Jason's birthday is in a few days, and he wants to invite you to his party." Brian looked at her and asked, "Why is he asking you to invite me?" Helen answered, matter-of-factly, "He's working at my research institute now. It was just convenient." Brian's lips twitched. His eyes held a trace of indescribable irony. He remembered clearly 5 years ago when Jason went abroad. Helen vowed she'd never work with him again. Yet now, with Jason back, it's like she never said it. "Not interested in digging up past issues," Brian simply said. "Noted," Helen replied, ending the conversation. A few days later, on Jason's birthday, Helen left early in the morning. After getting ready, Brian headed to the closet to change. Looking at all the conservative suits, he paused. He suddenly realized that through the years, he'd loved so humbly, even unconsciously imitating Jason's style. Jason loved tailored suits, so Brian wore them too, although he truly preferred more stylish brands. Now that he decided to leave, he figured he'd start with how he dressed. Digging into the back of his closet, he found his old avant-garde jacket from 5 years ago. It fit perfectly on his tall frame. Looking at his reflection, both unfamiliar and familiar, he ran a hand through his hair, exposing his forehead. At noon, Brian arrived on time at the scheduled place. As he approached the door of the private room, he heard someone sharply say, "What, Jason? You invited Brian? Why? Can he even understand what we're talking about exactly?" If not for Helen, he couldn't even get into our gathering. "So Helen, now that Jason's back, just tell us, are you choosing Jason or Brian?" Brian paused. He always knew Helen's circle didn't welcome him. She was a leading young theoretical physicist, the youngest female professor in the country. Her colleagues, self-proclaimed intellectuals, always looked down on his education, believed he was inferior to Jason, and thought he was unworthy of being with Helen. Brian never thought he was lacking compared to them, but for Helen, he endured it. But not anymore. Brian took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Seeing him, the group showed no embarrassment at being caught gossiping. Instead, they teased, "Brian's here. We were just joking around." Amidst snickering, Brian smiled. "It is funny. I wonder if your annual salary adds up to my monthly bonus. What makes you all so confident?" The room fell silent, stunned by this previously silent man's retort. The woman who spoke earlier turned red and green. Helen looked up at Brian with a cold tone. "Brian, that's not funny." Brian met her gaze. When others joked around, she ignored it, but when he replied, she spoke up. Deep down, she shared the same views as her circle. She looked down on his education, thought he wasn't as good as Jason, and believed she was settling with him. That realization hit Brian's chest like a weight. Just as Jason approached, trying to smooth things over. "Oh, Brian's always been like this since he was a kid. Let's not take it to heart." Jason's words were dripping with insincerity. In the past, Brian would have argued with Jason, but since deciding to let go of Helen, he couldn't be bothered. With a chuckle, he sat down. "Yeah, seems temper runs in the family." Jason was surprised Brian didn't fight back. After a while, the chatter resumed. Someone deliberately raised their voice. "Ms. Chun, your project is a national one with millions in research funding. Unlike some people, making dirty money." Brian ignored the snide remarks. He wouldn't see them again after today, but seeing Helen indifferent to it all, he felt a twinge of sadness. When the meal finally began, Jason picked up a spicy chicken wing, and Helen immediately chided, "You can't eat spicy food. Remember your stomach issues." Helen, who was clueless about everyday life and relied on Brian for reminders, yet she remembered Jason's preferences so well. Brian already had no appetite, and now he couldn't eat another bite. At the end of the gathering, Helen paid the bill first. As they walked out, Brian followed behind. Suddenly, he recalled how, before Jason went abroad, the three of them were always like this. When Jason left, Brian finally became Helen's boyfriend, moving from behind her to beside her. He thought things had changed, but with Jason's return, it all went back to the way it was. Outside the hotel, Helen asked Jason, "Seriously, did someone pick you up?" Jason nodded. "Yes, my sister's on her way." Just then, a car pulled up outside. A kid jumped out and hugged Jason. "Uncle, happy birthday." In the next moment, when the kid saw Helen, he started to whine. "Auntie, you haven't visited me in so long." Brian was a bit taken aback. Helen instinctively glanced at Brian, but she first bent down to pat the kid's head before telling, "Send me a message when you get home." Jason nodded at her and gave Brian a look. It wasn't show-offy. It seemed more like he was saying to Brian, "See, even if Helen and I haven't spoken in 5 years, our connection is still stronger than yours." After the car pulled away, Helen turned to Brian and said, "Let's go." Brian hesitated for a moment before walking alongside her. Once they got in the car, Helen explained, "I used to be close with that kid. I didn't realize Jason hadn't told him we'd broken up." Brian turned to look at her. With no light in the car, half of her face was hidden in shadow, and he couldn't make out her expression even on the visible side. Thinking about her explanation, Brian just chuckled softly. It was funny, wasn't it? The misunderstanding was with the kid. Helen could have cleared it up with one sentence, but she didn't. Now she's explaining to him instead. Wasn't that amusing? Brian turned to look out the window. Helen didn't get a response, so she glanced at him, and her eyes lingered on his stylish jacket. She frowned and said, "And also, don't dress like this again. It doesn't look good." Brian's heart trembled. Was it really that he didn't look good, or did Helen just prefer when he dressed more like Jason? Brian closed his eyes and kept quiet. When Helen saw he wasn't responding, she also went silent, staring straight ahead. When they got home, Brian went to the study. He was heading to Germany soon, so he needed to polish his German. Luckily, he had a basic understanding from before, so relearning it wasn't too hard. He didn't hide his studies from Helen, but she never asked or seemed to care what he was up to. The next day, the first phase of the H airline project was officially agreed upon. Brian took the opportunity to host a party, inviting several folks from the financial world. It was a huge success, and for the first time, Brian ended up drunk at one of these parties. Richard, his buddy, frowned and said, "You guys didn't stop him? Letting him get drunk like that? What now?" Everyone looked at each other, unsure what to do. Does Brian have a girlfriend? I don't think so. Why not give that girl a chance? She likes Brian, right? Let her take him home. Richard skidded and was about to offer to take Brian when the door burst open. Helen stood there, her eyes cold as she took in the sight of the drunk Brian. "I'll take him home," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. The room fell silent as Helen walked over to Brian, helping him up. As she supported him out of the room, the others exchanged curious glances, wondering about the relationship between Brian and this unexpected visitor. On the way home, in the taxi, Brian was in a half-conscious state, mumbling incoherently. Helen sat beside him, her expression unreadable. Every now and then, she would steal a glance at him, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions she couldn't quite understand herself. When they arrived home, Helen struggled to help Brian into the house and onto the bed. As she was about to leave the room, Brian suddenly grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong despite his drunken state. "Why? Why did you come?" he slurred, his eyes searching hers. Helen froze, feeling a strange pang in her chest. She didn't know how to answer, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at a loss. The following days, Brian recovered from his hangover, but the tension between him and Helen seemed to have grown thicker. Brian was more focused on his preparations for Germany, while Helen threw herself deeper into her work at the Research Institute. One evening, as Brian was packing his suitcase, he came across an old photo of him, Helen, and Jason from their childhood. Memories flooded back, and he couldn't help but sigh. Just then, Helen walked into the room. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Are you really leaving?" Helen finally broke the silence, her voice softer than usual. Brian looked at her, his expression calm. "Yes, it's time for me to start over," he replied. Helen nodded, then turned to leave, but before she could, Brian called out to her. "Helen, I hope you find what you're looking for." Helen stopped in her tracks, her back to him. She didn't respond, but as she walked out of the room, a single tear rolled down her cheek. A few days later, it was time for Brian to leave. He stood at the airport, waiting for his flight. Just as he was about to head towards the boarding gate, he heard someone calling his name. Turning around, he saw Helen running towards him, her hair disheveled and a look of urgency on her face. "Brian, wait," she panted, reaching him. Brian looked at her, surprised. "What is it, Helen?" he asked. Helen took a deep breath, her eyes filled with a newfound determination. I don't want you to go," she said, her voice trembling. Brian's eyes widened in shock. He never expected this from her. "Why? What about Jason?" he asked, his heart pounding. Helen shook her head. "I was wrong. I've been wrong for a long time. I thought I loved Jason, but all this time, it was you. You were the one who was always there for me, who understood me even when I didn't understand myself. Please, Brian, don't leave." Brian stared at her, torn between the years of pain and the hope that her words brought. Just as he was about to say something, an announcement came over the airport speakers, calling for the final boarding of his flight. Helen looked at him, desperation in her eyes. "Brian," she pleaded. Brian took a deep breath, then gently took her hand. "Helen, I need time. Time to heal, time to figure out if we can really make this work. But I promise I'll come back. And when I do, we'll talk. Properly." With that, he gave her a sad smile, then turned and walked towards the boarding gate, leaving a heartbroken but hopeful Helen behind. Richard was about to take Brian home when Brian's phone rang. The screen displayed Helen's name. Richard picked up and put it on speaker. A calm female voice came over the line. "Brian, where are you? Why aren't you home yet?" Though her tone was cold, it confirmed her identity as Brian's girlfriend. Everyone was shocked. After all, in all these years, no one had ever heard of Brian having a girlfriend. He'd worked late so many times, and no one had ever come to pick him up. Only Richard frowned at the cold tone and said, "Hi, I'm Brian's colleague. He's drunk. Can you come pick him up?" The line was silent for a moment. Then her voice suddenly turned frosty. Someone quickly provided the address, and the call ended. The colleagues buzzed with chatter, amazed by this revelation. Richard looked at a very flushed Brian and sighed. When Helen arrived at the venue, Brian's intoxication had faded slightly. He was just dazed, sitting on the sofa. Helen walked up to him, and he stared blankly at her without saying a word. Helen quickly and carefully looked him over, then coldly asked, "Was it necessary? Was it necessary to drink to this point for a job?" Brian's mind was fuzzy, but he instinctively wanted to reply that it was. However, sensing Helen's displeasure, he didn't snap back. Instead, he tugged at her sleeve and mumbled, "Let's go home." Helen felt a tightness in her chest. She gave a brief nod to the observant Richard and took Brian away. Brian fell asleep in the passenger seat as soon as they were in the car. Helen glanced over absent-mindedly. She noticed he was wearing a white shirt under his coat today, and her frown relaxed. He looked much better like this, less flashy than those garish clothes she disliked. When they got home, Helen led Brian to the bathroom, intending to help him sober up. But he pulled her down by the collar, and random kisses landed on her face. Helen, flushed with desire, finally had enough and held the back of his head to kiss him back. Things finally calmed down. Brian lay face down on the bed, his mind clear, but his body too drained to move. Helen leisurely emerged from the bathroom, looking unusually gentle. Suddenly, her phone rang. Seeing Jason's number, she immediately answered. Jason's anxious voice came through. "Helen, I accidentally set the pan on fire when I was cooking. It's burning. What should I do?" Helen's face changed instantly. "I'm coming right over." Hanging up, she went to change. Seeing Brian watching her, she reflexively gave an excuse. "The lab has an emergency. I need to step out. No need to wait for me tonight." Without checking his reaction, she quickly dressed and left. With her departure, the house grew cold again. Brian said nothing, closing his eyes in discomfort. They had just been intimate, the warmth not even gone, and she was rushing to another man. He didn't know how long it had been when his phone rang. It was Jason. Brian suddenly had a feeling this was Jason's power play. He listened to the ringing before finally picking up. Jason's emotional voice came through. "Helen, let's get back together. You still love me, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have come to me right after leaving Brian." Brian stopped breathing for a moment. He unintentionally tightened his grip on the phone. Then, Helen's raspy voice came through clearly. "Yes, I still love you." In the next instant, the call ended. The cold glow of the screen highlighted Brian's pale face. At that moment, Brian didn't know if he was more upset that one call from Jason was enough for Helen to leave him, or for the fact that despite Jason choosing his future over her again and again, Helen kept forgiving him. Lying in bed, Brian recalled a memory he thought he'd forgotten long ago. It was the first year Jason went abroad. Helen had won her first big award in physics. Brian happily took flowers to surprise her backstage at the awards, but overheard her talking with a friend. "Your project with Jason won the award. Aren't you going abroad to get him back? Don't tell me you're actually planning to stay with Brian? Brian's not good enough for you." Besides his looks, Helen paused for a long time before responding. "I'll think about it." The next day, she lied to Brian, saying, "I'm going abroad for an academic conference. I'll be back in a week." Even though Brian was already Helen's boyfriend, he didn't dare ask directly, "Are you going to see Jason?" He was afraid to ask, fearing that if he did, he'd end up single. All Brian could do was say with red-rimmed eyes, "I'll wait for you to come back." Brian held out for a week and finally saw Helen return. That day, Helen, who never drank, was completely drunk. She leaned on Brian's shoulder, slurring, "Brian, from now on, it's just going to be the two of us. You won't leave me, right?" Brian remembered how his heart ached back then. Holding Helen, he promised, "I won't leave you." Once those words left his mouth, he stuck by them for 5 years. Brian always thought he could endure until things got better, but he didn't expect he would tire out before that time came. At this moment, Brian's eyes were slightly red, and he finally sighed. "Helen, I'm sorry I have to break my promise." He was going to leave her. He no longer wanted her love. The next morning, Brian went to the office. He found out that leaders from Germany were visiting that day. After their evaluation, they spontaneously decided to visit a local museum. As an employee about to go to Germany, Brian had to tag along. After a few hours, he was a bit tired, so he sat down in the rest area. Suddenly, a bottle of water was handed to him. He looked up, startled to see it was Helen. He thought he was hallucinating. Helen opened the water and helped him take a few sips before he caught his breath enough to ask, "Why are you here?" Helen didn't answer, but instead introduced Brian to the woman next to her. "This is my boyfriend, Brian." Then she introduced the woman to Brian. "This is the new researcher, Karina." Brian reached out his hand, smiling politely. "Nice to meet you." Karina shook his hand, beaming. "Wow, your boyfriend is so handsome. What a catch for you. By the way, where does your boyfriend work?" Helen hesitated for a moment, then vaguely said, "At a small office." Brian raised a brow at that. He knew well enough that Helen didn't even know where he worked. They'd been together for 5 years, and though he hadn't changed jobs, it clearly didn't matter to Helen. So Brian filled in the details himself. "I work at a firm called D." Karina was surprised and playfully slapped Helen's arm. "You humble much? That's one of the top 4 firms in the world. If that's small, there's no big firm around here." Helen paused, seemingly at a loss for words. Helen looked at Brian with a complicated expression, staying silent. Karina didn't think much of it, saying, "I'll head to the front. Catch up soon." Helen nodded. Once Karina left, alone with Helen, they walked slowly. Helen's face was tense, lost in thought. Brian sighed and spoke plainly. "I work at D firm as a fund manager, handling fund investments and management." Helen lowered her eyelashes, avoiding his gaze. "Why are you telling me this?" Brian responded calmly. "Next time you can tell people that instead of just saying I'm your boyfriend, and that's it. I'm not just Helen's boyfriend. I have my own identity." Helen frowned, her tone somewhat annoyed. "Our work fields are totally different. How would I know about some D firm?" Brian paused briefly, then lightly chuckled with a sense of realization. "Yeah, we really are from 2 different worlds." The smile faded quickly, and he looked ahead where his boss waved at him. "All right, let's drop it. I've got to go talk to my boss." Brian picked up his pace and walked ahead. Once next to his boss, the boss looked pointedly at Helen behind him and asked, "Your girlfriend?" Brian nodded. "Yes." The boss jokingly asked, "You okay with going to Germany alone? Not bringing her?" At that moment, Helen joined his side, calmly gazing at the exhibit. Her profile was just as defined as before. Brian chuckled softly, turning his gaze away. First, he knew Helen didn't speak German, so in front of her, he confidently responded in German, "I'm okay with it." After wrapping up the socializing, Brian saw the managers off. Turning around, he only saw Karina, who pointed to a store. Helen went to get water. Brian nodded. Karina, being chatty, naturally started talking. "I'm here mainly for the opening test of the Deep Space Science Art Museum, a branch of the City Star Observatory. Your girlfriend has been working on this project for 5 years. It's opening tomorrow. You're coming, right?" Brian remembered seeing Helen visit the Star Observatory website before and didn't think much, simply said, "She didn't mention it to me. Besides, I have a meeting tomorrow afternoon. Can't miss it." Karina was surprised and immediately pulled out a ticket from her bag, boldly saying, "Oh, she might have forgotten. You're her boyfriend. How can you not come?" Brian took the ticket, his expression unreadable. When Helen returned, she handed him a bottle of water, asking casually, "What did Karina say to you?" Brian instinctively shook his head, "Nothing much." Early the next morning, Brian sat on the sofa watching Helen as she bustled around. From the moment she got up, she pulled out a couture dress she usually wears only to big events and got herself ready as if she were heading to a wedding. "I've got something today. I might be back late." Helen finally remembered to tell him just as she was about to head out the door. It was obvious she had no intention of inviting him to whatever opening ceremony she was off to. Brian felt a little pinch in his chest, but he replied calmly, "All right, good luck with the opening today." Helen was taken aback for a second. "How did you know?" she started to ask, but her phone rang before she could finish. She glanced at it and quickly forgot about him, answering warmly, "You're here already? I was planning to come to get you." Jason's clear voice came through the phone, though Brian couldn't quite catch the words. The front door closed, cutting off the last bit of sound. Brian took a ticket out of his bag and looked at it for a while. Eventually, he called his assistant, "Push back my afternoon meeting. I can't make it." At 2 p.m., Brian walked into the Starry Sky Museum. It had been 5 years since his last visit. The last time he was here, it was to witness Helen confess her feelings to Jason at the old observatory. Back then, Brian stood among the crowd, knowing he had arranged that entire scene for her confession. And today, is there a main character for this grand opening? The ceremony had already started when Brian found a spot to stand. Once the lights hit the stage, Helen walked up. She carried herself with such poise and confidence that a few of the women in the audience began whispering. Helen took the microphone and spoke fluently. "This Deep Space-themed science art museum is a joint project of our Deep Space Exploration Lab. It's taken me 5 years to complete this." Saying this, her gaze drifted to Jason in the audience, her tone suddenly softer and more magnetic. "I once promised someone we'd explore the universe together. We lost 5 years, and this museum is a reunion gift to him. Jason, thank you for coming today."